Hey, I'm Wes, the Explosion, and it's time for round 5 of Classic vs. Battle Network, where I analyze a Robot Master's design, then do the same for their net navi equivalent to compare and contrast, and choose a favorite. That's right, this isn't a power scaling video, so save your actuallys. And since we're on 5, we'll have 2 absences that will require some matchmaking, and to really confuse things, a supporting character that I kinda forget has an EXE, and a boss that... well, you'll see. The score thus far is Classic 16, Battle Network 19, with the bonus rounds being 0 to 3, so let's see how things turn out this time. How does one even personify gravity? Well, I guess they could always make his torso apple-shaped and his arms out of fig newtons, or, I don't know, throw in some black holes since they suck things in just like gravity draws us towards a planet, but original Gravity Man instead just goes for looking as sci-fi as possible, which, yeah, sure. Gravity is a pretty complex concept, so being able to bend it to your will would require some pretty powerful science. He has a gauge on his chest, probably to measure his output, and some wires on his hips to maybe focus whatever crazy power supply he's got. He's also got a big G on his stomach, and his shoulder pads are massive. You could kill a man with them, and given that he damages Mega Man primarily by bumping into him when they swap sides, maybe that's the point. With the side view, he also doesn't seem all that thick, maybe to help him cut through the air. Of space. Does his room have atmosphere? But either way, he looks very big from the front, but might actually have less mass than you'd expect from the side, making his frame easier to support. Or maybe he's supposed to look vaguely boomerang shaped, since he does go back and forth from ceiling and floor, and he does have those quick band colors. I'd say more though that with that big silhouette, G, and dynamic colors, he seems more like a space opera superhero, being really imposing and hard to miss. It's also worth noting that his front focus is even more clear when you see how plain his back is, just some screws, a round focal point, and in general being a less detailed version of his chest. He also has an odd little cap, which might just be for an extra detail. There's a triangular chunk taken out of his helmet, giving it a V for victory, or maybe just eyebrow shape. And the triangles, green jewels, and extra layer to his feet are extra details, likely for flair since standing out seems to be his main thing. He's also got the yellow rings around his lower legs, which kind of emphasize his height since it's like they have extra levels, and they also kind of remind me of the meter on Mega Man's Buster, so maybe he's always at full power. Meanwhile, Gravity.EXE does, I guess, the other obvious thing they could have done with the concept: spheres, like planetoids drawing you in. They keep the red, the head plate, and still give him a gauge, but his eyes are closed and mouth a simple single row of teeth, likely because he's meant to be a lower intelligence navi due to his other processes drawing so much power. He's got antennae, which make him look a little alien, a little older technology. He's got something on his back, maybe to exhaust burn-up energy or to push him forward, since he has no other visible signs of propulsion. And rather than legs, he's got a few bluish-silver dishes and a point, all held a certain distance apart, probably kept in place by his internal gravity. His arms slowly turn in perpetual motion, the black ridges twist around when he kicks into gear, and his fingers are more like claws, because he doesn't really seem designed for fine motor skills. He's also got an opening in the middle of his torso, which reminds me of a viewing deck on a space station, but is more likely there so he doesn't have to contain all of his massive power, allowing him to vent any excess. That does seem to be where his black hole attacks come from after all. He definitely seems more machine than being. While I think the Navi does a better job getting the theme across, I'm leaning more on the original, just because of how unique his silhouette is, and how silly some of the details like his big G are. So I'm going classic first. Waveman is an aquatic RM, thus he's blue. Largely dark blue, but there's some light ones in there too. He's also got a good bit of yellow, and given that his head crest looks kinda like the end of a trident, think Neptune, god of the sea, we can just think of that as gold. There's a few other colors, black which would blend in deep under the water, and a bit of orange, green, and white, which gives some variety. As for his details, he has a hose from his chest to his mouth, which seems unnecessary. I mean, they're already connected, but it does make one think of scuba gear. His chest piece is an X, maybe as a reference to X marks the spot, His right hand's a harpoon gun, and his buster has ridges, which it does function like a pump. His feet are flippers, and the thing on his back looks almost like a submarine hatch, if you think of the green jewel as a window. And while it might not be in his name, at the same time, his rounded chest does make me think of a bubble. It kinda feels like they threw a lot at the wall with his design, about every diving and nautical reference they could think of. I could see some thinking it's a little much and kind of haphazard, but I don't mind him. Unfortunately, he doesn't have a Navi equivalent, so to fill in the blank, let's match him up against Rockman.EXE, which is what he says he is, a shark that is also kind of a man. He's got a similar color scheme, blue with some yellow around his edges, though whether he's also gilded or if the yellow's just there to highlight his different parts, who can say. He's also got some white on his underside, which does bring to mind actual sharks. Black once again would blend in, but he's also got a good bit of green, which would be a mix of blue and yellow, or maybe it's because the sea does have green life like algae, but in either case, he's also got a rib-like pattern under his chest. These could be to represent gills, scratches from battle damage, which might make the most sense since they're also on his legs, or if we wanted to get morbid, the actual bones, either referencing the remains of those he's eaten, or being trapped behind his own, if you happen to meet that fate. I don't think I need to comment on why he has sharp teeth in the fin, but he also has what looks like a pair of engines on his back, and he does like jetting through the water. A bit more unusual are his arms and legs. He has the pointed shoulder pads, which are a fun bit of flair, and his arms are kind of lanky, ending in 4 fleshy triangular fingers which can kind of fold together to look like one piece, which would make the limbs seem like it was just one very long flipper. The legs, though, are just kinda people legs. It's like they cut off a shark's tail, slapped on a human's lower body, then really bent his top half forward so that he wasn't stuck looking straight up or constantly doing the forward crawl, depending on whether he was on land or sea. In-game, you really only see his top half, but his awkward stance and long limbs have him looking a little silly, especially when he runs rather than swims. And while he might not have a Robot Master, I always think of him whenever this fan design comes up at the end of Mega Man 8. Making me wonder if they maybe took a fan submission and turned it into a Navi instead. While it's not one-to-one, he's still closer than some of the designs that actually did get adapted, so I kinda hope this got credit somewhere. As for which one I prefer, Wave or Shark, that's a little hard since while both are fine, neither of them are such standouts that I have a clear favorite. I think I'll go with Wave Man since it's kinda fun to come up with reasons for all the parts of his design, even when they really could have been there just because, though part of me half expects that I'll change my mind when recording. Nope, wait, looks like we're going with it. I feel a little weird discussing Stone Man's design since I could almost just say Guts Man but made of bricks and be done since I already went over him, but maybe that's not totally true. I mean, he is a big, bulky guy, largely made of bricks, brown rather than red, which makes him seem more earthen. And man, he's got them beefy shoulder pads just like Guts, along with the chest gem, green this time, and a yellow belt. He's got white gloves, which contrast the black bodysuit, and his jaw kinda looks like it could be a mouthguard, but seems to open like Guts' in-game. He also has what looks like a jetpack on his back, which might be there to help him with his high jumps, and there's an indent on the top of his helmet. I imagine it's there to make it seem more hat-like, though maybe it's a bald spot, or maybe you're supposed to throw coins in it and make a wish. He's also got an arrow pointing down on his forehead, which could be another extraneous detail, or, given that he is pretty much made of building materials, to indicate which way he should be oriented. After all, if you had a container of bricks, you wouldn't want someone tilting it the wrong way and spilling them. Someone could literally die. I'd also describe Stone Man as taller and Guts Man as bulkier, so their proportions are a little different. Compare that to the Minecraft block. Okay, he's not exactly a cube. His front is more squarish, but his face and back are curved. He's still made of blocks though. More gray than brown, and they're cut into odd shapes, then slipped together. He's also got some red, which might be for flair, might be to make it look more like the stereotypical brick color, especially in-game, or it might be to have him at odds with Mega Man, since, I swear, they only put him in the first game because they thought that the rock versus stone thing was funny. His eyes are yellow dots sunken into the black depths of his face, giving off the whole stone golem that's pretty much an ancient robot trope. His limbs are disconnected with some weird marble things pointing out the top. I'm reminded of some magnetic balls I had as a kid as part of a science set, so maybe he uses magnetism to manipulate his parts. His feet are kinda goofy, just big stone slabs cut in the general form of shoes. His arms look more like short columns, which, given that he looks like old ruins come to life, help in making him seem more like a structure than creature. Both stone men are fairly simple designs, looking more constructed out of bricks and blocks than carefully screwed together or programmed into being, and I don't hate either of them, but I think I'd give the nod to classic, if only because his cousin is so handsome. Gyro Man's a pretty solid design. Granted, you might find yourself wondering why the up in the sky guy isn't blue, but that overlap with Mega Man, and there's already a good bit of that with the other RMs in this set. It also make him hard to pick out from the background, and I mean, if you have a helicopter, you're gonna want to show it off, not have it blend in. Plus, like I mentioned with Sharkman, green comes from blue and yellow, which he also has, and there's the whole verdant wind trope. As for his propeller, it's white and black. Maybe the white's for the clouds, but more likely because it's going to be spinning fast enough to carry him through the air. Why make him too fancy if you won't get a good look? Though the edges are a contrasting color to make them stand out, and make sure you know to keep your hands away. As for his headgear, while it's pointier, it's still kind of a propeller, or maybe more of a pinwheel, which also works for an air-based boss. His mouth and nipples are ridged in a way that look kinda like vents for airflow, and for probably my favorite detail, his feet are actual sets of connected metal rails, which look like the landing gear on helicopters. So silly, but I love it. As for Gyro.EXE, he is a transformer. For one of his attacks, he literally folds into a helicopter and drops bombs, plus he also uses this form to fly over dark panels, and since he's an air vehicle, he'd be a Decepticon, and I almost feel like I could leave it there, but alright, let's keep going. Pretty much every detail can be taken from that. His chest is the cockpit, complete with glass windshield, he's got the propeller on his back, the landing gear is now on his arms, and his legs are kind of thin and flat, since they combine to form the tail, with the mini blade for turning in his ankles, and a tail fin poking out of each leg. His eyes are glass, maybe to reference aviator goggles, though the way they're shaped, they remind me more of the semi-opaque goggle attachments on pilot helmets, even if they're not quite as big. As for his colors, he's primarily yellow or gold, and given that his net-up is a hotshot pilot, it works as a way to be flashy. Orange for his head/helmet is another warm color that works well with yellow, and the blues, with almost a tinge of green for his blades and cockpit, work because sky. I won't drag this out, it's classic Gyro for this one. While I don't think it's a bad design, EXE just does kind of feel like they took a character, or at least someone's OC for one, from another franchise, and slapped them in Battle Network. There's a reason I'm a Mega Man guy and not a Transformers guy. Several in fact. Meanwhile, Gyro Man looks like he belongs in the series, is a fun design, and while I'm not into feet, his really do it for me. I once sketched a mock-up of a robot master named Circle Man, which was just a character with a bunch of circles slapped across his armor, and it was all to make fun of this guy, Starman. Rather than do anything interesting with the whole bright burning balls of gas thing, he just has a star headpiece, star knee and elbow pads, a star buster nozzle that fires out stars, and the most unique thing on his body, a star chest piece. Only now the shape is upside down, each arm isn't equal, there's a bit of blue in the middle, and there's a little chunk cut out under his neck, though it still looks like he'd have trouble moving his head around with it. Was there a manga that cited that as a design flaw once? Anyway, he's the same shape, cut out 6 times, and slapped on him like a tray of cookies. Star cookies, obviously. But hey, let's dig a bit deeper, though not too deep since there's not too far we can go. His stars are yellow because it's a warm color and one often used to represent light. White's often used in a similar capacity and stands out pretty well against a dark background, like, say, space. Thus his shoes, glove, and ears. He's got some blues in there, the one on his chest armor being particularly dark like the night sky. Orange is another warm color, so the light thing again, and I don't know what to make of the rest of his armor. With the sprite, I interpreted it as a darker shade of orange, but looking at the art, it seems to be more a cross between that and brown, which, I don't know. Maybe there's a reason there, but with how thrown together he looks, it might just be a color because they needed a color. A few special notes: the Buster Hole is kind of cute, even if it is just more star for the overly starred Starman, and there's a part of me that wishes the star on his chest connected to another star on his back via shoulder straps, like a sandwich board, so maybe I could make a joke about slapping some advertisement on him, like Eat at Joe's. But yeah, I'm bored, let's move on. To Starman.EXE, who I actually have things to say about. He's a small guy with big black eyes that look like they don't have pupils so much as a bit of light glinting off of them. With his white face, he's kind of reminiscent of Grey's, a popular alien depiction from way back, though he's also got a starburst crown which comes off like spiky hair, and he's got a scarf that could almost be a ponytail that ends in a star. You know, just in case his Navi symbol didn't give the theme away. The dots on each point make him seem a little artificial, like screw holes, and most Navis do look at least slightly robotic. His long boots give a similar impression, even if they are a bit simple. These and the hair are yellow because light, and he's also got red and blue around his Navi symbol, which not only makes it stand out, but give him all the primary colors. His body though is a not quite black like space, and white like white, both contrasting the other. There's bits of each leaking into both sides, like the light and dark encroaching upon each other, trying to wipe the opposite one out, or given his role in distributing the Zero virus, maybe corruption spreading or even a program shutting down and going dark. Unlike the original, which focuses on stars as a shape, Starman.EXE does a lot with the whole space theme and pulls it off really well. I really love his design, so no surprise he takes this round by a lot. Chargeman is another silly design. I mean, he's a train person. His head is a cylinder with a flat face, a smokestack to vent his coal-powered vapors, and an attachment in the back shaped like the booth for the conductor and where you'd shovel said coal. His neckline is the grill on the front of a train, same as on his feet, used to smash aside anything idling on the tracks because, hey, if it's getting rammed by a train, it's done. Why let the locomotive take damage too? The sides of his shoulders look more like wheels, with some indents where maybe a spoke arm could slot in to turn them. Speaking of, Chargeman a lot of times does seem to have his arms in the position where it looks like he's about to make the chugga chugga movements, you know? He's also got a belt, which you can see locks into another piece of metal going up his back into his headgear, maybe to help distribute the weight of his locomotive noggin. As for his colors, they're almost all warm. Red, orange, yellow, almost pink. Probably because he runs hot due to his power source, which he'll launch burning fragments of. Move on to his Navi, and it's even more straightforward. He's no longer a man with a train head, he's just a train with a Thomas the Tank Engine face up front. Well, no, not quite. While those are a bit more human and friendly, Chargeman.EXE's is just a pair of eyes peeking out from where the front window would be, with the train's grill coming off his chin almost like a beard. He's got a little headlight just in front of the smokestack to illuminate his way. His conductor booth looks even more complete than his ancestors, and there's two little pinchy arms that look modded on, since a normal train wouldn't have any, but given all the tasks a Navi has to perform, they would. Still not too complex though, since the focus is much more on his train than human features. And while he keeps the red, it's a much sharper, almost regal shade. Because he is a professional, the train's gotta run on time. He's got a bit of orange trim to highlight where some of his sections start and end, and his face is a more cream color, with green eyes, that not only gives him a more balanced palette, but makes him look more approachable, because he's there to serve you, dear passenger, whereas his claws are an odd shade of gray, which suit their more mechanical shape. He can also trail some extra carts, appropriate for an actual train who just runs a lead car, that are black with the skull painted on the side of one, since combat is still a pretty big focus, you know, in Battle Network. That's just the official art though. In-game, they're open carts for picking up passengers, and given that you can change train cars out, their designs aren't all that important. I really like both Chargemen. No, it's not an autism thing, though at the same time, I wouldn't say no to a train ride, and there could be one on the design team. For the original though, I just find it funny that they kind of took a train, made it a Robot Master's head, and called it a day. But the Navi, it feels like they had a bit more freedom. He's less a man wearing a train costume and more a train with a few human traits thrown in so that he can more easily interact with the general populace. I really want to give it to Classic just because of how ridiculous I find him, though they do manage to pull off the concept with his movements and stance, but I have to give it to Battle Network just because of how much they committed and how sharp he looks. His color scheme is also more pleasant rather than borderline painful. I'll also give a special nod to Charge Cross since it's the perfect middle ground between the two, but I still think I like Chargeman.EXE enough that he'd still take it. Napalm Man is one of the stupidest Robot Master designs, and I love him for it. He has a missile launcher in his head, popping out like a pompadour, he's got missiles sticking out of his shoulders, and he has bouncy bombs he can fire from his non-hands that look almost like lipstick. He's got something for forward propulsion on his back, and tank treads for feet. In-game, he's constantly squatting like he's always in position to either brace himself to fire something off, or jet straight ahead. And he's an airman body type, probably because a neck and swiveling head would just complicate things when all this guy really needs to do is commit war crimes. Seriously, what were you thinking with that name? He's ridiculous, and in a silly sort of way, it works. Weapons on top of weapons on top of weapons, with the treads and backpack making them easy to transport. As for his palette, red would be a color for explosions, thus his head and hands, yellow is a sign for caution, and purple is often used for villains, which this is one RM that looks like he'd be hard to rehabilitate. The green chest jewel works kind of well with the rest of the color scheme, and the blues are probably just there so that not all of his bombs are the same color. Also worth noting are the 3 slits below his eyes, which could be for speech, maybe a set of nostrils, or like we discussed last time with Skullman, kind of look almost like a set of skeletal teeth, which work well since bare skulls are often a symbol of death. There was a line in there somewhere where an android specializing in war should have stopped to stay reasonable, and they sailed right past that with Napalm Man, and that somehow makes him endearing. Well, assuming that you don't know anyone that was a victim of napalm. They didn't even give the guy hands, just so they could stuff more destruction into him. Then there's EXE and... someone get that boy a sandwich. Okay, maybe I'm exaggerating a bit just because of what he looked like before. With how much was packed into the original, it'd be hard not to see him on the small side, though he is a bit lankier than the average Navi. He's a lot sleeker in this form, and given that he's more about rapid fire than big attacks, that kinda makes sense. Instead of bomb-tipped arms, he has 2 barrels that can deliver a steady stream of fire. Call me dumb, I'm not exactly sure what type of cannon they're supposed to be, but the way the gray part in the back moves, it kinda looks like a gun chamber shifting to expel a bullet casing. He's still purple, which makes him easy to link to his previous iteration, and he does start off as a secret boss in the hidden WWW area, so he at least was a villain. He has a few grays thrown in, a more mechanical looking color which works for his whole weapon theme, and he's also got some oranges, almost copper parts, which work either as a warm color associated with explosions or, again, gives him a more metallic feel. The kind of whitish part around his head provides a bit more color, and he's got some weird sort of black padding around the back of his feet that I almost want to say might be to help keep him in place since his orange pompadour is where he fires his napalm bomb attack from. EXE isn't bad, he still gets across the whole weapon thing, but I kinda prefer just how over the top the original is compared to the more slim and sexy model, so Classic gets this one. With Crystal Man, we're kinda back in Starman territory. He's just kind of a guy made up of crystal balls, and that's pretty much it. He's got 1 on his head, 1 on each shoulder and knee, his torso seems to be another partially encased in armor, his forearms are another 2 each, and he has 3 small ones across his back. I guess we can discuss colors. His armor is kind of a dull blue with his face mask, gloves, and shoes being white, which goes well with blue. Black for arms and legs are pretty standard, and there's a few bits of red like his belt, probably so that he's not all cool colors, though they do seem a little out of place. As for his balls, I mean, those would typically be made of glass, which aren't really a color, they just filter them. Had they made them simply white, he would have looked more like a Pearl Man, so it makes sense that he's blue, matching his armor and stage. As for what his crystals are specifically, I'm not really sure on the science of it, but it sounds more like that's a term for the atomic structure rather than a specific material, so I think this is another instance where they probably could have gone with any color, but when I think fortune telling, which crystal balls are used for, I think either a dark or cool colored place. Most of those are already covered here though, so I guess they just went with an odder shade of blue that wasn't in use. Honestly, he looks more green to me, at least on the NES, making it kinda seem like they didn't have a strong idea for his color palette and didn't care enough to commit to it. And maybe because of this wishy-washiness, there is no Crystalman.exe, so we'll go with the other guy made of balls, Bowlman. And they went there, huh? His cranium's a bowling ball, and each arm is made up of 3 of them. though they went with green rather than the obvious black. And fair enough, those things can be any color, so just go with your preference. And while I've been known to play the game now and again, I'm no expert. I mean, red's kind of a sporty color, making me think of tracksuits, and white goes well with that. His torso is a bit oddly shaped, his head just kind of being fused into it, though if he had an actual neck, I might say he's kinda shaped like a bowling pin. Not to worry though, since he has a huge one in his same colors but with a bolted rim making it look heavy duty, which is appropriate since you can use it to gatling a bunch of smaller pins your way. I have no idea what's up with his huge knee pads or whatever's hanging off his hips, though maybe both are for flair, and his hat's got a pointy yellow brim, establishing the ball as an accessory rather than his actual brain. There's also some little bits that look almost like fangs under his face, which make me think of characters that wear a helmet or a hood meant to look like they're in a dragon's maw, though I don't think the rest of his headgear exactly pulls that off. Combine that with his stance and stony look in the official art, and while I might not get all the little details, it at least comes across that he takes the game seriously. So I'll give this one to Bowl Man, since there is at least some creativity in his design, whereas Crystal Man feels pretty low effort. Starman has stars, Crystal Man has crystal balls. Oh no, this one's actually 4 designs, which feels like not just more than what I signed up for, but also, how do I score this? Do I just go with the best of the set or average them together? Well, let's figure it out as we go. Each Darkman has yellow eyes and the domed machine brain. Looking at the profile art with all of them, you can see slight differences between each, like some being red and others pink, and if it weren't for this, I'd question whether they weren't actually the same robot, the head being the actual Darkman, just swapped between the different bodies to maybe test different part combinations. Kinda like how the Doc robots were the same basic models with previous special weapons swapped out. Besides that, they share the yellows, which isn't used as one of their primary colors, black for their arms and legs, and some white thrown in, all of which unify the designs as a series. There's also some greens here and there, like around their eyes, but that's actually the main color for Darkman 1. For the most part, I think those are just to differentiate them, but hey, if you want some bullcrap reasons, one has tank treads, and tanks were often colored green in media, at least back then, and the blue parts of the treads contrast the red of 4, those two bookending the Darkman series. He's also got a pretty simple torso, as most of them do, but him being the first, he's even more basic. No hands, just guns, and the aforementioned lack of legs. On his back, he has what looks like one of the bombs from the dam level in Turtles, but is probably just a battery pack or something. The next one is more of a dark gray, fitting of a Darkman, and there's really not much to say beyond that. He uses a barrier, so his body is just kinda basic, a robot master body. I guess kind of an airman type since none of these really have a neck per se. He has a green backpack, which is something. Maybe that's where he pops those shields out from. The next one is the fanciest so far, one arm's a cannon, not just from the elbow down, but the whole darn thing. He's purple like Napalm Man or Vile down the line, so maybe that's just their combat unit color. His one shoulder pad is a bit pointier, which is an extra detail that might mean Wily was starting to be proud of this one. He's got a jetpack, which this one does jump around a lot, and the big red gem on his chest, which he fires the Cheerios that freeze you in place. Darkman 4 is massive. He has a big chest, wires on either side of his head, devil horn shoulders, pointy shoes, a big, maybe jetpack, extra little circle decorations on his sides, and an ornamented buster. You can see bits and pieces of the other Darkmen in his design. The basics from all the way back from 1, the yellow segments on his chest and shields from 2, and the circular knee pads with the yellow vents from 3, plus he's red like Proto Man, who he impersonates until his disguise gets destroyed. Each form gets more complex, with more superfluous details added in. Well, 2 might be a step down, but at least he got actual limbs. It kind of feels like we're seeing a rough first, second, and final draft, but rather than discarding or building upon previous iterations, Wily just threw them all our way. None of these guys are really all that spectacular, but as an evolution chart of the planning to final product, these are actually kind of a cool concept. Darkman.EXE shares the devil horn shoulder thing with Darkman 4, plus his head is also sort of a glass dome thing, which is even more obvious in the concept art. That, along with his glowing eyes and the segmented section where his mouth should be, gives him an inhuman look. Maybe even robotic, or maybe something that used to be a person that had to be salvaged. I get major Darth Vader vibes. He has a big collared cloak with slits cut into it, making it even more fancy. I bet it looked cool fluttering in the wind. It looks pinned in place by his navi symbol, kinda making me wonder if he could cast it off if he so chose. You also don't see his arms, which part of me thinks that it makes him seem like he's partially sealed, which works since he is demonic looking. Another impression is that you're so far beneath him that he doesn't even need to dirty his hands to defeat you, and in the fight, with as straight as he stands, he almost looks like a pillar, which also works symbolically since he's one of the 3 bosses in the Undernet, and you need to topple him to fight Serenade. His boots are pretty fancy, having different colors and layers to them, feet looking almost Talon-like, what with the black popping out the back too, with the 2-tone parts adorning his legs, open at the top, and jewels circling them. Between the cape and open boots, which look more like something to be worn rather than a part of the Navi himself, he definitely has a regal, if evil, appearance. As for his colors, well, that's a little more complicated since those change. The black horns and dark cloak should need no explanation, he's Darkman. Purple is a color often associated with royalty and villains, and the green eyes stand out. He can use a flame tower when in this form, which works for a devilish boss, but he can also change the purple parts of his cloak and his eyes to blue when using an ice crystal to attack, and the purple to an orangish yellow with red eyes to fire a line of electric. While there doesn't seem to be too much of a pattern to his peepers, each cloak color matches the sort of attack he uses. This also kinda ties back into the whole multiple boss types the original had, just a recolor instead of a new form. It does feel a little weird though, since there were 4 of them and there are 4 elements here, yet there's not a green wood type Darkman. Given that this adds an aspect where you have to contend with attacks you might be weak to, making it so that electric doesn't really have to worry about this seems odd. But maybe since wood is more about growing living things, it felt weird to have Darkman have access to it. Or maybe there's something I'm missing here, but there was almost another 4 of them. Kind of. Whether we take the original as a set or just pick my favorite, I'm still giving this to EXE. Yeah, he's ridiculously edgy, giving even base a run for his money, but hey, there's dumb, over the top, trying way too hard edgy, and there's the kind that pulls it off. And I think this Navi does. Beat's a pretty simple one. He's a robotic bird with little wings and a goofy, smiling little beak. He's largely blue, and while his are white instead of light blue, the bumps on his head are very reminiscent of Mega Man's helmet, which makes it very easy to associate him as a support unit for Rock. Yellow for the beak and feet are pretty self-explanatory, and the white underside is pretty common for real birds. Also kinda fun to notice that he's got the sort of Sonic conjoined eye thing going on, but I'm pretty sure it was Cossack and not Tails who made this guy. Compare that to Beat EXE, who I kinda forget exist and have never used in-game, and pretty much everything I said still applies. Sure, his beak's a bit sharper, plus he's got the tail feathers, but all the colors are pretty much the same, and his head is also a recreation of Rockman.EXE's. About the only things left to say here are that he's wearing goggles like an aviator, good to avoid tearing up while flying through the air, and 2 oddball little hairs, which come off as kinda goofy. Which you like more probably comes down to what version of Mega Man you prefer, and I started this thing off by picking the Robot Master, so Classic gets this one too. Well, this is probably the least enthusiastic I've been about one of these. While normally I get really into it, looking more closely at characters I tend to just blow up and move on, discovering cool details that I never noticed before, a lot of these felt more slapped together. While a few of the Robot Masters managed to stuff enough on-theme elements in to be kind of amusing, others were just the same things, copy and pasted several times in the general shape of a person. And while some of the Navis managed to really upgrade the idea, others were merely fine. Also feels like a lot of these designs vary a bit between official art and sprites, and while not everything's gonna translate perfectly, the deviations were a lot more noticeable here. Makes it a little awkward when I say something is one color and the NES shows another. Might be worth mentioning that 5 is my least favorite of the mainline classics, and this might be part of the reason. Kinda feels like the Navi should have taken this round, but somehow I wound up preferring Classic 5 to 3, though the Navis I picked I really liked, so they're winning on enthusiasm, with the bonus round being split, putting my overall score at Classic 21, Battle Network 22, bonus rounds, Classic 1, BN 4, so Navis are still winning for me overall. Anyway, 6 is next, and I love that. Really looking forward to it. Except for the part where I still need some video of Windman.EXE. Please, I don't want to go back to Red Sun. But let me stop whining and ask you, what do you think of these designs and how do your own scores stack up? Ignore bonus if you want. With that, thanks as always for watching, and maybe consider subscribing if you're into retro games, especially Mega Man. For everlasting peace.